They say justice is blind, but what happens when the system that's supposed to protect the innocent is built to ignore the truth? In a courtroom packed with tension, a black woman named Talia Freeman sits accused of assaulting a police officer. The prosecution is confident, the officer is smug, and the outcome seems inevitable, until Talia opens her mouth and changes everything. What no one in that room knows is that she's not just another defendant. She's a retired Navy SEAL, a decorated war hero, and she's about to flip the entire trial on its head. This isn't just a story about a wrongful arrest. It's about power, prejudice, and the quiet strength of someone who refuses to be broken. Stay with us, because what you're about to witness is the unraveling of a lie and the rise of a warrior. It was supposed to be a standard court proceeding, routine, uneventful, forgettable. But the atmosphere inside Courtroom 3B told a different story. The air was thick, almost electric, as people shuffled quietly into their seats. Reporters tapped away at their keyboards, legal assistants whispered in hushed tones, and a camera crew from the local station zoomed in on the defense table where Talia Freeman sat in total silence. Her eyes, dark and alert, didn't blink often. Her posture was ramrod straight, but not tense, controlled. She wore a tailored navy blue suit, a white shirt buttoned up to the collar, and no jewelry except for a simple watch. Her appearance was deliberate, strategic, modest, but commanding. At a glance, Talia looked like a woman who belonged at a boardroom table, not in the defendant's chair. And yet, she faced 3 serious charges: resisting arrest, assaulting a police officer, and obstruction of duty. These were not light accusations. If convicted, she could face up to 5 years in state prison. But what truly unsettled the room wasn't the charges themselves. It was how little Talia seemed fazed by them. Her lawyer, Julian Banks, barely older than a graduate student, reviewed his notes for the 3rd time, beads of sweat beginning to form on his temple. He was new, maybe too new, and she, too calm. Across the courtroom, Officer Derek Lawson, the man who had filed the charges, sat with his hands folded on the table in front of him. His police uniform was spotless. His expression carried a quiet arrogance, the kind that came from years of being listened to without question. He would tell the court that Talia had acted aggressively, that she had refused to comply, and that she had even tried to reach for his weapon. It was a damning story, and he told it with rehearsed precision. But there were already whispers, among journalists, even a few jurors, that something felt off. Why had the body cam malfunctioned? Why wasn't there any dash cam footage? And who exactly was Talia Freeman? As the judge entered the room and called the session to order, none of those questions had answers, but everyone could feel it. This was not going to be an ordinary trial. Courtroom 3B was old but dignified. High ceilings framed with dark oak beams, walls lined with shelves of worn legal books, and stained glass windows that filtered the morning light into a soft amber hue. The judge's bench loomed at the front like a throne carved in wood, imposing but fair. Everything about the room seemed to whisper the weight of justice, or at least the illusion of it. But today the setting felt different, less sacred, more staged. The public benches were filled with a diverse cross-section of the town: retirees in Sunday clothes, college students skipping class, activists with notepads, and neighbors who just wanted to see what all the fuss was about. Even a few uniformed officers lined the back wall, silent, observant, clearly there in support of one of their own. The tension was subtle but unmistakable. Conversations were hushed, glances were exchanged, and phones were quietly silenced as the bailiff gave a single sharp command: "All rise." Judge Marcus Alden, a man in his early 60s with steel-gray hair and an unwavering stare, entered the room. Though known for his fairness, he was also known for one other thing: his zero tolerance for courtroom theatrics. As he took his seat and glanced at the docket, the murmurs in the gallery faded into silence. He looked up, taking in the scene before him. Officer Lawson sitting upright like a soldier at attention, Julian Banks nervously straightening his tie, and Talia Freeman, still, calm, unreadable. It was clear she wasn't intimidated by the setting or the stares. If anything, it seemed like she had been in more dangerous rooms than this. The judge cleared his throat. "State versus Talia Freeman," he announced, his voice echoing across the chamber. "Let's proceed." Officer Derek Lawson rose slowly, buttoning his uniform jacket with care as if preparing for a performance. He walked to the witness stand with the confidence of someone used to being in control. After swearing the oath, he sat down, cleared his throat, and locked his gaze on the jury. "I was on patrol that night," he began, his voice steady, responding to a report of suspicious activity near a closed storefront on East Monroe Avenue. He spoke like a man reading from a well-rehearsed script. "That's where I encountered Ms. Freeman. She was loitering on the sidewalk, looking into the windows of the business." Julian Banks raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Lawson continued, "When I approached and asked what she was doing, she immediately became defensive. She refused to identify herself, raised her voice, and began yelling about being unfairly targeted." There were a few murmurs in the gallery. Lawson paused, glanced at the judge, then at the jury, and went on. "She then pushed me in the chest and attempted to grab at my sidearm. At that point, I had no choice but to restrain her, for my safety and the safety of the public." It was a serious accusation. His words were calm, confident, and delivered with just the right amount of emotion. To anyone unfamiliar with the full story, he sounded credible. Even Julian felt the eyes of the jury shift slightly. But one person didn't move. Talia. She sat still, her eyes fixed on Lawson, her expression unreadable. She didn't flinch, she didn't blink, she didn't need to. Because she knew lies told with confidence are still lies. When her name was called, Talia Freeman stood, slowly, graceful, unshaken. Her steps were calm, controlled, as she approached the witness stand. The room quieted instantly. For the first time, every eye focused not on the uniformed officer, but on the woman in the navy blue suit. She adjusted the microphone, her fingers steady, swore the oath, took her seat. Then she looked straight ahead, not at the judge, not at the prosecutor, but at the jury. Her voice, when it came, was low but strong. "I understand the seriousness of the charges brought against me," she began, "but I also understand what it means to be falsely accused." The room tensed. Some shifted in their seats. The prosecutor leaned back, watching carefully. "That night, I wasn't doing anything wrong. I had just finished visiting a friend and pulled over to check my phone for directions. That's when Officer Lawson approached me, with his flashlight in my face and an accusatory tone in his voice." Julian Banks leaned forward, listening intently. "I didn't yell. I didn't run. I didn't touch him. What I did do was ask a question. Why are you stopping me? Am I being detained? For that, I was grabbed, shoved, and handcuffed." Gasps filled the room. The judge called for order, but the silence that followed was even louder. Talia continued, "He said I was being hostile. He claimed I resisted, but I didn't resist. I froze. I was afraid, not because I had done anything wrong, but because I knew he didn't see me as a person. He saw me as a threat." She paused, allowing the weight of her words to land. "I've been trained to stay calm under pressure, to assess, not react. And that's exactly what I did." At this point, even the prosecutor's smirk had vanished, because slowly, undeniably, the courtroom was beginning to believe her. The moment Talia finished speaking, a strange kind of silence swept over the courtroom, one that didn't just come from quiet lips, but from minds racing to reconcile what they had just heard. No one moved, no one coughed, even the air seemed hesitant to circulate. It wasn't just the content of her testimony that stunned the room, it was how she said it. With calm clarity, no trembling voice, no theatrics. Her words didn't beg for belief, they simply existed with the kind of weight that couldn't be ignored. One woman in the gallery, unable to help herself, whispered aloud, "She's telling the truth." The sentence wasn't shouted, but in the stillness, it echoed like thunder. Officer Lawson, once the most composed man in the room, now sat rigid, his jaw clenched tight, nostrils flaring, and eyes darting between the judge and jury. He shifted in his seat, readjusted his collar, then quickly realized the motion only made his nervousness more obvious. The courtroom had begun to turn, not because Talia demanded it, but because her poise exposed his performance. Julian Banks glanced at the jury box and saw what every defense lawyer hopes to see: engagement. Jurors were leaning in, Some scribbled notes faster. One had put their pen down entirely, eyes locked on Talia. There was no longer the look of passive observation. There was attention. Genuine, unsettled attention. The prosecutor, clearly rattled, shot up and objected, claiming speculation. But Judge Alden, who had remained silent and observant, simply replied, overruled. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The momentum had shifted, and everyone could feel it. Then, Talia dropped her final sentence like a precision strike. And let me be clear, he said I reached for his weapon. That's a lie. I never laid a finger on him. But I did notice one thing. His body camera wasn't on. The words hit harder than a shout. For a brief moment, it was as if time paused. You could almost hear hearts skip. People exchanged stunned glances, hands covered mouths. Someone gasped audibly. The spell of authority that had surrounded Officer Lawson was cracking. He blinked, his throat bobbed, but he said nothing. The gallery rippled with murmurs. The judge pounded his gavel twice, sternly demanding order. But it was already too late. The courtroom had changed. Trust had shifted. And the truth, now spoken out loud, had no intention of being buried again. The silence following Talia's revelation didn't last long. The courtroom buzzed again, not with chaos, but with contained energy. People were piecing things together. If Officer Lawson's body camera wasn't on, then everything he claimed was unsupported, unverifiable, and potentially fabricated. The judge adjusted his glasses and turned toward the prosecutor. Does the state have any video evidence to corroborate the officer's account? He asked, voice sharp but measured. The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably. Your Honor, the department reports that Officer Lawson's body camera suffered a technical malfunction that evening. A low ripple of disbelief passed through the courtroom. Judge Alden raised an eyebrow. Convenient. His tone didn't accuse, but it lingered. The gallery felt it. The jury felt it, and Lawson, he certainly felt it. He sat like a man shrinking under a microscope. Julian Banks seized the moment. He stood up and addressed the court. Your Honor, the defense would like to place on record that the only account of what happened that night comes from a single source. An officer whose camera was not functioning, whose dash cam footage is missing, and who has a documented history of excessive force complaints. His words cut through the air like steel. The courtroom leaned in again. Talia remained motionless, calm, letting Julian take the lead now. The prosecutor attempted to recover. We believe the malfunction was genuine. Equipment failures are not uncommon. Julian cut in. But they are convenient, especially when the accused is a civilian and the accuser wears a badge. The statement hung in the air like smoke, thick, lingering, and hard to ignore. What was supposed to be a case about resisting arrest had now become a case about credibility, integrity, and whether the justice system was willing to look itself in the mirror. And for the first time, that mirror was starting to crack. The courtroom had emptied out, but the tension still lingered in the air like a storm refusing to pass. Outside, the late evening sun painted the courthouse steps in amber light. Julian Banks stood alone for a moment, briefcase in hand, mind spinning with everything that had happened. Then his phone buzzed, a message from Talia. Come to my place. There's something you need to see. Later that night, Julian pulled up to a small, well-kept house tucked beneath a line of quiet oak trees. Talia greeted him at the door, dressed in a plain navy sweatshirt and dark jeans. No courtroom posture, no calculated composure. Just her, unfiltered, grounded. Inside, the house was minimalist but warm. On the mantel above the fireplace sat a folded American flag in a glass case, next to a framed photo of a younger Talia in uniform standing beside another soldier. Julian's eyes paused on it. You served? He asked. Talia nodded. I didn't just serve, she said as she walked over to a locked drawer and pulled out a thick leather-bound folder. I led. She handed it to him. Inside were documents, military ID, commendation letters, deployment records, classified operations. Julian flipped through page after page, each one more unbelievable than the last. Finally, he looked up, stunned. You were a Navy SEAL? Lieutenant Commander. Retired. Julian sat back on the couch, trying to process what he'd just learned. Why didn't you tell me this from the beginning? Because it's not just about who I was, she said calmly. It's about what he thought I was. Lawson didn't see a veteran. He didn't see a leader. He saw a black woman alone on a sidewalk and thought he could control that. Julian didn't speak for a long moment. He looked down at the folder again, then back at Talia. Her eyes were steady, but now he could see that deeper layer of strength she had never mentioned in court. You sure you want to drop this tomorrow? He asked. Because when this comes out, the whole game changes. Talia gave a faint smile. That's the point. The next morning, the courthouse stood like a monument against the gray sky, its stone walls damp with dew. Word had spread. The gallery was full well before 9 a.m. Reporters with cameras, activists holding signs, even off-duty officers lurking in the back, their expressions unreadable. Something had shifted, and the town could feel it. Inside, Julian sat at the defense table, sharper than ever. Gone was the nervous rookie from earlier. Today, his movements were crisp, focused. He glanced over at Talia, who wore a tailored navy blazer over a crisp white shirt. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was commanding the room without saying a word. Julian leaned over and whispered, "Are you ready?" Talia responded without looking at him. "I've been ready for years." The gavel struck and Judge Alden entered. Court is now in session. The prosecution opened the day with confidence, calling Officer Lawson back to the stand to clarify inconsistencies. But the air had changed. Lawson, once composed, now showed subtle signs of strain, slight hesitation, less eye contact, a tightness in his voice. Then came Julian's turn. Calm but assertive, he launched into a line of questioning that peeled away Lawson's credibility layer by layer. He didn't just challenge the incident, he challenged the entire narrative. Why wasn't the camera on? Why was the report filed hours after the arrest? Why were previous complaints never investigated? The pressure built steadily. And finally, Julian delivered the first real blow. "Your Honor," he said, rising slowly, "the defense will be introducing new evidence, a sworn military service record of the defendant, Lieutenant Commander Talia Freeman, retired Navy SEAL." The gallery erupted. Gasps, murmurs, the prosecutor's face drained of color. Officer Lawson's jaw visibly tensed. Judge Alden banged his gavel. "Order!" But the shift was irreversible now. Talia wasn't just defending herself anymore. She was forcing the system to defend its bias. The shift in atmosphere was palpable. People weren't just watching a trial anymore. They were watching a reckoning unfold in real time. Julian Banks, with precise movement, stood up and walked to the evidence table. He picked up a silver USB drive and held it between his fingers like it weighed more than steel. "Your Honor," he said, turning to the judge, "this drive contains video evidence captured by a bystander from across the street. It was submitted less than 12 hours ago and shows the interaction between Officer Lawson and Ms. Freeman at the exact time of the incident." The room held its breath. Judge Alden nodded to the bailiff. "Let's see it." The monitor blinked on. The footage began. It was shaky, handheld, clearly filmed through a half-rolled car window. The camera angle wasn't perfect, but the sound was pristine. Officer Lawson's voice cut through first, loud, sharp, commanding. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." A moment later, Talia's voice responded, steady, controlled. "I'm not resisting, let go of my arm." Then came the moment no one could unsee. Lawson shoved her, roughly, against the hood of the patrol car. His hand gripped her wrist tightly. His words followed. "Women like you don't get to question me." Gasps erupted across the gallery. The jury leaned forward as one, transfixed. Even Judge Alden's stoic posture shifted slightly. Julian said nothing. He didn't need to. The video kept rolling. No voiceover, no edits, just cold, clear evidence. The tension in the room thickened with every second of unfiltered truth. The prosecutor's face had gone pale. His hands twitched, his jaw clenched. Across the aisle, Lawson sat stiffly, a visible sheen of sweat now creeping down his temple. His eyes flicked from screen to jury, then back down to the table. When the video ended, the screen faded to black, but the weight of it lingered. No one moved, no one whispered. Even the journalists had stopped typing. For the first time since the trial began, the power dynamic had completely shifted. Talia wasn't just a defendant anymore. She was a witness to her own truth. Julian finally broke the silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, looking directly at the jury, "you've heard testimony, you've read reports, but now you've seen it. You've seen what really happened." That moment was no longer about guilt or innocence. It was about exposure. And in that courtroom, stripped of illusion and stripped of narrative, the truth had found a voice in pixels and sound, and it spoke louder than any badge ever could. There was no official announcement, no dramatic outburst, but something unmistakable had shifted. You could see it in the way jurors sat differently, straighter, stiffer, more alert. You could hear it in the silence, no longer neutral, now charged with something deeper. Doubt, discomfort, and the slow ignition of truth. Julian Banks stood quietly at the defense table, watching the room breathe differently. His eyes flicked from the jury box to the prosecution table, where the once confident district attorney now shuffled papers without purpose. Officer Lawson stared down at his lap, shoulders hunched, sweat pooling at the edge of his collar. The weight of the video still hung in the room like a storm cloud that refused to pass. Julian didn't speak right away. He didn't have to. The video had done more than words ever could. It hadn't just challenged a story, it had shattered an illusion. Finally, he rose, straightened his jacket, and walked toward the center of the courtroom. His voice, when it came, was low and deliberate. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, "truth doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers and waits for someone brave enough to hear it. Yesterday, you were asked to believe a decorated officer. Today, you've seen with your own eyes that even those with badges can lie. You've seen the difference between a report and reality, between control and justice." He paused, letting his words breathe, then continued. Talia Freeman stood calm while her dignity was torn apart. She didn't resist. She didn't provoke. What she did was ask a question: why? For that, she was thrown into handcuffs. For that, she was lied about. But she never wavered, because deep down, she knew the truth would rise. In the jury box, a middle-aged woman dabbed her eyes with a tissue. A man near her shifted, arms crossed, but no longer defiant. He was thinking, processing. Somewhere in that quiet, justice was beginning to speak. Not through shouting, not through rage, but through something stronger: clarity. The courtroom, still thick with tension, seemed to hold its breath again as Judge Alden looked directly at Officer Lawson. "Mr. Lawson," he said, "you will return to the stand for further questioning." The silence that followed wasn't out of respect, it was anticipation. The gallery watched him like an audience waiting for the final act. Lawson rose slowly, no longer with the confidence of a man in control, but like someone being led to a reckoning. He took his seat at the witness stand, cleared his throat, but the sound cracked halfway out. Julian approached with the precision of a surgeon. No shouting, no drama, just pressure, relentless surgical pressure. "Officer Lawson," Julian began, "you stated under oath that the defendant was aggressive, that she reached for your weapon, and that you feared for your safety. Yet the video shows none of this. Do you stand by your testimony?" Lawson blinked. Once, twice. He looked toward the prosecutor but found no support there, just silence. I may have misremembered some details," he muttered. A few gasps broke the stillness. Julian didn't stop. "Misremembered or fabricated?" Lawson shifted, eyes wide now. "I did what I thought was necessary," he said, but his voice no longer held authority. It was unraveling. "Necessary for who?" Julian pressed. "For public safety or for your ego?" The courtroom held still, suspended in that question. For the first time, Lawson looked truly cornered. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he mumbled. His voice cracked. His hands trembled. The badge on his chest, once a symbol of power, now looked like a weight dragging him down. And then, the words that sealed everything. "I panicked. She wouldn't back down. I lost control." It wasn't shouted, it wasn't heroic, but it was real. And in that admission, Derek Lawson wasn't a villain in uniform anymore. He was just a man, exposed by his own fear and the truth he tried to silence. The courtroom was silent, but not empty. It was full of tension, full of memory, full of everything that had been said, revealed, and unraveled in the past few days. Talia Freeman sat still at the defense table, her hands folded, her expression unreadable. Julian Banks stood beside her, jaw tight, his eyes scanning the jury box. Across the room, Officer Lawson sat hollow-eyed, his uniform still on, but the authority behind it long gone. The bailiff re-entered the room. All rise. The jury filed back in, 12 people carrying the weight of truth, of justice, of something much bigger than just one case. The foreperson, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a steady voice, stood and handed a folded paper to the judge. He opened it, read for a moment, then nodded. "You may read the verdict." The foreperson turned to face the room. Her voice was calm, but each word landed with the weight of a gavel. In the case of the state versus Talia Freeman, we find the defendant not guilty on all charges. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Some cried, some exhaled. Julian closed his eyes for half a second, then turned to Talia, who still hadn't moved. She was frozen, not in fear, but in release. After a long pause, she exhaled softly, like she had been holding her breath for years. The foreperson continued, "Additionally, we recommend that the department launch a formal investigation into Officer Derek Lawson's conduct." That second line hit harder than the first. The judge nodded solemnly. "This court will honor that recommendation." Talia finally stood, slowly, silently, as if carrying the weight of not just her own name, but every name that had ever been buried under a false report, a false arrest, or a false assumption. She turned to Julian and whispered, "Thank you." But Julian shook his head. "Don't thank me," he said. "Thank yourself. You never stopped telling the truth, even when the system wasn't ready to hear it." The courthouse slowly emptied, but the story was just beginning to spread. Outside, cameras flashed, microphones were raised, and reporters jostled for space. But Talia didn't stop for interviews. She didn't pose for headlines. She simply walked down the steps, not as a woman seeking attention, but as one reclaiming her voice. Julian walked beside her, his expression still unreadable. "You just changed more than your own future," he said quietly. "You changed the narrative." Talia didn't respond. She didn't need to. The applause that began as a ripple among the crowd soon became a wave. People clapped, others raised their fists, a few simply stood still, tears on their faces. Over the next few days, her name would appear in newspapers, in hashtags on national news. But she never sought fame. She only ever wanted fairness. She had fought on the battlefield, and now she had fought in the courtroom, and both had required the same things: discipline, courage, and an unshakable belief in what's right. As for Officer Lawson, the investigation into his conduct was swift. Old complaints resurfaced. Internal affairs opened a full case. Within weeks, he was placed on administrative leave, pending multiple charges including false reporting, abuse of power, and perjury. But more important than any punishment was what changed in people's minds. Conversations began in homes, in schools, in police departments. For many, the case wasn't just about one woman versus one officer. It was about a system, and how easily truth can be buried beneath confidence and a uniform. And through it all, Talia remained steady. She didn't see herself as a hero. She saw herself as someone who didn't back down when it mattered most. Someone who stood still while others ran. Someone who didn't just speak truth. She lived it. Months had passed since the verdict, but its echo lingered, not just in headlines or legal briefs, but in hearts, in conversations, and in quiet moments when people stopped to ask themselves, "What would I have done?" Talia returned to her life, but it wasn't the same life. She still woke early, still took long walks beneath the oaks behind her home. But now, when she walked, people stopped her. Strangers, veterans, young girls. They didn't come with questions, they came with thanks. She never called herself a survivor or a hero or a symbol, but somehow she became all three. Because the truth isn't just something you speak, it's something you carry, something you stand on, even when your knees shake. And that's what Talia did. In a courtroom, on the street, in silence, in strength. And maybe that's the real definition of courage. This wasn't just a courtroom victory. It was a reminder that no uniform, no title, no report should ever stand above the truth. That silence can be broken, that justice can be demanded, and that one voice, calm and clear, can shift an entire system. If Talia's story moved you, don't let it end here. Share it. Talk about it. Carry it. Let it be a spark in your home, in your circle, in your world. Because truth doesn't need to be loud. It just needs someone brave enough to speak it. Subscribe for more powerful stories like this, and remember, the world doesn't change on its own. It changes when we do.